Hi, everyone.
Greetings. I'm going to be reading from Cost of Discipling track that we've gotten, I think, 3 videos in. This is, I think, number 4.
Yes.
Yeah, but before we do that, we should talk about the reality as we found it among Jehovah's Witnesses. Last time we made the point that they're starving, but for a different reason than people in the churches are starving. In the churches, you have the embarrassment of riches. You have good, well-stocked libraries generally, even in the church, and seminaries way beyond that. And you have what generally well-trained pastors who have had some training.
Mm-hmm.
You have the opposite problem if you're in the Watchtower, which
Yeah.
is you have poorly trained leaders on the
Yeah.
local level and incompetence at the top.
Mm-hmm.
So this section of our tract is called the cost of incompetence. We're going to be reading it from the screen
Mm-hmm.
because we don't have a hard copy of this. But the very last sentences of the last section we did were, many churches have capable chefs, very few have nutritionists on staff, by which we mean people that really know what they're doing in terms of the food and where to get it and what's a good source.
Yeah.
Very few, it appears, consider the Lord's table an important priority in the congregation budget. Now, that was true of our church life. We'll get more into that in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the cost of our fast food addiction? You made the point that, well, fast food is not even the appropriate phrase when you're talking about Jehovah's Witnesses.
It's more like instant food.
Yeah.
With the Watchtower, because they do everything for you. You know, they supply the questions, they supply the answers.
Yeah.
And you don't need to think at all. Just listen to whatever they say and parrot it. Agree with it.
But unfortunately, that creates junk food addiction, and that's true of a lot of people in various churches too. If they read it all, they're generally reading stuff that's not particularly nutritious, but it does suit a certain emotional need that they have.
So they'll read books that maybe are encouraging laziness in a way. They don't want to just read and study Bible books. They want a how-to book.
Yeah.
How to do this, how to do that. And so they do it like the Watchtower, topically.
Yeah.
A lot of people read books like that on a regular basis, and it's the only kind of book they read.
We saw that in the book business. We'll get more into that in a few minutes. But first of all, we wanted to talk about the reason that we didn't notice this. I can speak for myself here. Why didn't I notice that we were getting fast food, junk food really? Well, for the first few years I was in there, I didn't see it that way, and there was a reason for that. And if you've seen this book before, which we've plugged, Jehovah's Witness Literature by David A. Reed, he lays it out really well as to why in the early 70s we who were becoming converted in, and that was me and many of my friends.
And I was only just coming of age sort of at that point.
Why were we not noticing that we were so poorly fed? Well, I can tell you about the year I was baptized. In David Reed's book, look at this list of books that were released in 1971. Well, starting with the aid book, I was thrilled that year when the very assembly at which I was baptized, the full aid book came out, 1,600 plus pages. I thought, well, who has anything like this? A Bible dictionary. So, yeah, I didn't know anything. But at the same assembly,
You were impressed with it.
I was impressed. They released at the same assembly, Listening to the Great Teacher. Remember that kids' book?
Mm-hmm.
And the nation shall know that I am Jehovah, their Ezekiel commentary, Fred Franz, 400 plus pages. The Theocratic School Guidebook was released that year. Then the next year, so there were 5 books therefore, and one booklet, the booklet that we used a lot in our pioneer work in those days, which was When All Nations Collide Head On with God. So 6 publications released at that 1971 assembly. And then David Reed points out that in 1972, they released the Bible in Living English, another translation by Stephen Byington. They released the Organization for Kingdom Preaching and Disciple Making, and Paradise Restored to Mankind by Theocracy. Then in 1973, the Concordance was released. I was thrilled with that because now I could search anything. I didn't know that there were concordances already out there.
I still use quite a bit.
Yeah, we still use that. It's well indexed. Also, they released God's Kingdom of 1,000 Years Has Approached, which even the title was thrilling, right? Okay, we're getting close to 75 now.
Yeah.
The millennium.
Yeah.
And, of course, the True Peace and Security book. So what could trigger people more than that title?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it's a little funny in that, the witnesses are always listening for someone to say peace and security. And who did they hear? Themselves saying peace and security.
Yeah, that book was used as the next study book after the Truth Book for a while, and that really had a sense of urgency about it, didn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
But what we didn't realize at the time was they've been saying peace and security since the 1870s, really, that everything would end by 1914. So this was just more of the same. So I can say, at least for us, the ones that were being converted in, and there were hundreds of thousands of them being baptized, and among my friends there was at least a dozen that got baptized there. We were excited because of
Yeah.
the times and seasons, but we were also reasonably well fed. That is, if you don't know what Christendom already has,
That's right.
and we didn't.
And I had no comparison. It was just what I was just coming of age at that point, so, and just starting to do things like Auxiliary Pioneer and read the literature more regularly than I had as a kid. So.
But what I didn't realize at the time was, even in my own Bible studies, and I had quite a few during that period, I was already showing symptoms of boredom, as were my friends, and we didn't do the normal 1 hour Bible study 6-month program. I was being counseled by the elders to be strict about this, but at the same time I was realizing it's not working. My friends have drug addiction, they have sex addiction, and so I adapted it to their needs, and therefore the studies went longer than 6 months sometimes, quite a bit longer.
They probably were more interesting.
And they certainly were 1 hour. Sometimes they were all night, all through the night, and in that I knew I was disregarding counsel, but I could see that they responded to this approach, which was not subject; it was more Bible study.
And once you start reading the literature, once I became a teenager and I was making it my own, and I was reading the literature, it's not too long before you realize that most of it's repeat. So then you can sacrifice reading. You don't feel any discomfort because you think you already know. You know the truth, so you don't have to be diligent. You might still be reading it, but you're finding it's a regurgitation of what you already read in another publication, just a different cover and title.
Yeah, we all therefore felt a little restless, and perhaps we didn't know why. But one thing I did know for sure was some of my friends were exhibiting boredom, especially with the formats of the meetings when they started attending meetings.
Yeah.
So the signs were already there, but it took me 15 years to figure out why this is so. But what you don't notice is that this 5 books in 1 year thing, well, that's the all-time peak, I think, for the Watchtower. So we were suffering from the delusion that we were well fed, and now, from all reports I hear, witnesses don't at all enjoy the normal diet they're getting. In fact, it's been incredibly dumbed down, because in those days, 5 books, 1 booklet in 1971, but a magazine every week. So you felt like you could never keep up.
Yeah.
And that, again, sustained the illusion that we were well fed.
Really, really, when you think of what was required reading, it's not very much. Like, now that I know the contrast, now I know people who read, lots of books, whole books, and they don't have just one for the year and a magazine every week. That's nothing to a person who's a reader. But at the time, it seemed like a lot, and because you had all the meetings to go to and you were supposed to be out in field service all the time, it seemed like you were busy all the time.
And there was another factor, too, that I guess I noticed pretty early on, that the kind of people we were converting were generally from several similar religious backgrounds. They were all from mainstream churches, Catholics, United Church, and
Lutheran, maybe?
Lutheran, not too many of them either, but Anglicans, my background. People who had very little Bible knowledge. I was running into a lot of people who had a lot of Bible knowledge. They were always evangelical Christians. We never converted any of them.
Baptists,
and so they were used to Bible studies, and what they saw in us was not Bible study.
Yeah.
So the only people who would buy this as normal Bible study are people with no Bible study background.
And I wouldn't have noticed that kind of contrast, because growing up on the Watchtower, Christendom was like one block. They were all the same.
Yeah.
They had all the same beliefs. They had all the same ideas and ways and worship. I didn't know that there were some people within the church that were more scholarly or more inclined to real Bible study where they're looking at commentaries and individual books. So I'm meeting all kinds of people, and I would think those kinds of people are not the kind of people I would have had a good conversation with at the door. You might have. But I got a lot of lay people. And so the ones that would engage you didn't have a deep Bible knowledge. They didn't have flexibility.
And they would readily adjust to the fact that they were getting information. They didn't realize it was meager compared to what they could get out. They didn't.
If they had exposed themselves to books themselves.
And I was kind of prevented from boredom by the very fact that I was a reader, so I was going out but getting secondhand books and feeding myself that way. But all of the pioneer friends I had who weren't readers were showing serious symptoms of boredom even before 1975.
Yeah.
And that was, I guess that was worrying, but somehow it never got me where I needed to be, which is why the fast food addiction. Like you said, this is not really fast food. It's tainted junk food,
Instant food.
and that's a similar problem to what we've been experiencing in the church, but not for the same reason. And so here's a couple of paragraphs that we wrote on this, on the issue as you find it in the churches anyway. What is the cost of our fast food addiction? First, an incredible lack of insight in spiritual judgment and priorities. We can build vast sanctuaries, I'm talking about church life now, but not deep saints. We can find energy for political polemics and agendas, but have no passion for social injustice in our own cities. We can weep over starving children in Darfur, but shed not a tear for North America's youth starving to spiritual death because the food we offer them is most often ill-prepared, sloppily served, and worst of all, not that healthy to begin with. Alas, what are we eating ourselves? If it has a generous lacing of sugar and sodium chloride, we are content.
Are there any other cost to our neglect and or incompetence? Incredible waste. Churches divide from each other, divided within. I don't know, I'm having a hard time seeing. Okay, energies expended, duplicating ministry outreach missions. We're going to just briefly stop and make it one size bigger. Sorry. I think it's the angle.
Oh, let's see if I can make it bigger. There you go.
Okay. All right. Overextended budgets and mortgages justified by our insistence that our peculiar vision demands our continued separation unto the Lord. Division, which is visible denial of the Holy Catholic Church, that's spelt with a small c. Affirming with our lips what we deny with our hearts and hands.
That is a reference to the Apostles' Creed, where we say we believe in the Holy Catholic Church, all small letters, by the way, not
talking about
not
the
Roman
universal
Catholic.
church.
But we deny it by the fact we don't consult anybody in any other denominations on anything, do we?
Yeah, and because we have all our own denominations, we're duplicating our work all the time.
That's right. So you have a half-empty sanctuaries in almost all the churches except the charismatic ones.
And each of you have a feeding for the poor or some kind of outreach.
Yeah, incredible financial waste.
That's right. You would do much better if you just pooled. But anyways. All right, next paragraph. A third cost of incompetent discipling. The world is paying no attention to us. If all our energies and expenditures are beating the air, are we all accountable to the God of all flesh for the lives of those who don't listen to our gospel? Paul said to the Ephesian elders that he was innocent of the blood of everyone, by virtue of his faithfully laying before saint and sinner the whole will of God. That's Acts 20:27. How are we doing in setting the whole will, counsel of God before each other and our increasingly anti-Christian communities? And how would we react to the whole will of God? If it were thrust before us, okay, I should read that again. And how would we react to the whole counsel of God if it were thrust before us? Would we even recognize the real meal after so long an addiction to its substitutes?
Yeah. So the cost of incompetence
Mm-hmm.
is that we've lost the culture around us. We've alienated it.
Lost
and so
their ear.
this was written, 20 plus years ago, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And look what's happened since. The culture that we're embedded in is increasingly anti-Christian.
Yeah.
And we're partly responsible for that.
Yeah. If you have a lot of incompetence, being very talkative, which happens in today's society, everybody is talkative, whether they're competent or not.
Yeah.
And then the listeners, they don't know that you're incompetent when you're speaking, and they might just buy what you're putting forward.
If they're judging Christianity by their exposure to it, which is incompetent lay Christians that they might bump into in real life,
Yeah.
and or TV pastors who are generally not just incompetent but heretical.
So they might reject it for the same reason. They just think, well, this doesn't seem very sensible or
They
deep
don't,
or
just like us as Jehovah's Witnesses, they haven't even experienced the real thing. If they went to a seminary library and talked to some of these students, they might experience the real thing. But in our culture generally, we don't bump up against it very often. I did, as you pointed out before, because I was a pioneer and kind of the go-to guy for people who had special calls that they wanted help with.
Yeah.
But the average pioneer doesn't have those kind of calls, like you said.
Yeah, and I think the confidence level is different. So you had more confidence. You were better read in the Bible than I was, and than many Jehovah's Witnesses. You were carrying your Bible around, reading it.
Reading the aid book, you mean?
No, the Bible.
No, I'm joking. I was reading the aid book, and I was using my concordance.
Yeah, well, that's true too. You were reading the aid book. I only referred to these kinds of books, and I didn't read straight Bible on a regular basis. You know, it was when I had a talk, I might read a whole section, but not a whole Bible book. That just didn't happen very much in my experience. So I think when you're like that, you don't have a lot of confidence. You're going to stick by the program the way the Watchtower presents it. Read the paragraph, read the question. You know, now it seems so unbelievable that we thought this was a good idea. Supply the question and give the answer. Well, no good teacher does that. They might offer questions or problems to their students, but they expect you to be able to clearly say how you find your answer.
But at least in those days, you could give an answer of your own and show a little bit of private research at the Watchtower study. It sounds to me like in the last 3 to 4 decades, that's all been eliminated.
Yeah.
And there were home Bible studies in those days that were Bible studies.
Yeah.
Or even Watchtower prep
It
study.
depends on who's leading the study too, because in my experience, if I went outside the Watchtower paragraph and made some comment, and they couldn't find it in the paragraph, the elder that was leading the study was like, "That's not in the paragraph."
Oh, for the old days when you could get away with that and even enjoy it. I remember there was one of the anointed, Charlie, who was in our congregation, the only one of the anointed, and he could be counted on to make those kind of
outside.
He could be counted on to give a spicy comment because he was using his experience and his reading.
Yeah.
But that was so abnormal even then. This is nearly 50 years ago, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The next time we're going to talk about the tract, the next subhead is the cost of competence. So what does it cost us to become competent? And that's what's, I think, not well discussed. It's certainly not even on the table to talk. First of all, because we don't view ourselves as potential teachers. We're not training to be teachers. We're content with less than that. So it has to do with not just what you don't know, but it has to do with what your goal is in the church.
We cater to our own comfort level. Most of us are a little lazy. So if, you've got the minister who does the work and he gives it to you. Well, that's true in the church too. A lot of people do that. They just expect them to do all the learning and just take it in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sloth in the church.
It's not a good habit. Yeah. We're going to link to our Christian library playlist to try and encourage you not to be lazy. And to a video we did based on the subject of the FDS, who really is the FDS. And we're promoting or encouraging you to find out about David Berceau.
David Berceau. Let me just flash that book
Who
in
is
case you haven't seen
a
it.
former witness.
This book he published some 20 plus years ago now. Ex-Jehovah's Witness elder. And if you haven't consulted him or don't even know about him yet, he's got videos on YouTube. Check them out. One of them is his testimony.
Historical resource book.
Bercot.
Yeah.
I'll put that link on your screen so you can get to know more about him. See you soon.
Bye.